Since the legislature started focusing on this, I think it's really significant that we've seen that 23.5% decrease in opioids on SWIFT claims, 21% reduction in opioid prescriptions, and then when we really started focusing in on these compounds, a 90% reduction in 1 quarter in those payouts. One of the concerns that was just raised, we were talking about voluntary versus mandatory. My concern is if we don't do something legislatively to fix this and to make it mandatory and criminalize, when you've got a Napro pack, naproxen and some cooling gel, $4,070 for a $28.60 worth of product. Basically a multivitamin mixed with CoQ10, a 30-day supply is $2,500. If we take that focus that the legislature has on this and say it's going to stay it'll be voluntary, and then all of a sudden it'll be cool for a little while, and then all of a sudden it'll revert right back to what it was. Secretary Alexiak and Scott, you both alluded to recommendations that you're planning on making. What are the teeth that you're looking at? And I'd also like to see some of the reports, Scott, that you received lately. I'd like to get us copies of those as well.
Certainly.
But what are you looking at to give teeth so that we can get the Attorney General's office and other law enforcement focusing in on these people who have not just a client relationship as an attorney or as a medical practitioner, but also whenever they start prescribing, they're prescribing their own particular formularies?
We've taken the input that we have gotten from the stakeholders that we have reached out to. The Governor's Policy Office is looking at that. That's where the recommendations will come from, as Scott alluded to, whether it's recommendations for legislation, recommendations for regulation. We are ready to enforce whatever we are told to enforce as a regulatory agency. Again, keeping in mind that we want to make sure that the appropriate people who are injured on the job get the appropriate medical care they need. That may involve those creams or opioids. So we'll do what we're told, I guess is what I'm saying, and that the teeth will come from whatever regulations or legislation are proposed, and we'll review them when they are in the process of being created. We'll talk about what we think the impact would be on the agency, whether staffing, dollars, if we think it will be effective. But that's a process that we'll be happy to be a part of. But where it ultimately lands is not up to us as an agency.
I understand that, and I know it's been mentioned before. There's not a single person up here on either side of the aisle or even out here in the audience that I'm aware of that wants to see patient care reduced. So I'd like that not to be part of the discussion, because what we have to do is focus on what the real problem is and start looking towards solutions. John, I appreciate your testimony, and you brought some very interesting things that kind of correlate with what Deputy Secretary Wayne had brought up in terms of the whack-a-mole kind of thing here. Every time we target something that these people who should be taking care of either their attorney clients or physicians as clients, they're taking advantage of their position, and this should be something that would fall under RICO as far as I'm concerned. Are there any states out there that have any kind of enforcement bills that would prevent this kind of stuff, where you go after one part of it and then they shift their target, these new formularies? Are there any states that are doing anything that is effective?
Well, states vary in terms of whether or not they have a mandatory drug formulary or not, and they also vary, as it turns out, on whether or not they address some of these new phenomena like dermatologicals. And so let me give one example. One of the most significant dermatologicals in Pennsylvania is a diclofenac solution, which is Voltaren is the brand name. It's a nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drug. And in Texas, the diclofenac is a no drug, so it's you have to get prior approval before you use it. However, in the California formulary, it's not a no drug. You don't have to get prior approval to use it. So even in different states, when you look at their drug formularies, where they have drug formularies, they can differ about this particular drug and others.
Is there any kind of a clearinghouse as to where the legislation is being effective, and specific types of legislation from one state to another?
So I guess the answer is I don't know of a study that has done a comparative study of the different drug formularies to ascertain which are more effective than others. The drug formularies tend to be fairly new, and so it takes some period of time to put together the data to analyze those impacts.